There is a place on this planet where Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, would disappear completely underwater and still not touch the bottom. It's called the Mariana Trench, and almost nothing about it should be able to support life. The pressure down there is over 1,000 times what you feel right now. There is no light. There has never been light, not once in the entire history of that place. The temperature hovers just above freezing. Food is almost non existent. And yet something lives there. Many things, actually. And they are like nothing else on Earth. There are fish with see through heads. You can look straight through their skull and watch their eyes moving inside. There are creatures that make their own cold blue light in a place where light should not exist. There are animals with mouths so large relative to their body that they look physically impossible, built to swallow anything that drifts close, because in a place this empty, you can't afford to let a meal escape. The deeper exploration has gone into the trench, the stranger the discoveries have become. But here's what makes this more than just a catalog of weird animals. The creatures of the Mariana Trench aren't just unusual. Scientists believe they reveal something fundamental about the limits of life itself, about what biology is actually capable of when conditions become extreme enough. Tonight, we descend into the Mariana Trench to meet some of the most unfamiliar life forms on Earth. But before we continue, if you enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing and leaving a like. And if you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments, what town or city are you listening from, and what is the time over there? Let's begin our descent. Far out in the western Pacific Ocean, beyond the familiar routes of ships, and far below the shifting surface, the seafloor bends downward in a way that feels almost unreal. The Mariana Trench is not a sudden drop, but a vast curving descent, a scar shaped slowly over immense spans of time. It lies where one part of Earth's crust moves beneath another, a quiet collision between tectonic plates that never truly stops. One plate slides downward, disappearing into the mantle, while the other rests above it, forming a deepening boundary that continues to sink. This process is called subduction, though the word hardly captures the scale of what is happening. Entire sections of the planet's surface are being pulled inward, drawn down by forces that operate far beyond human perception. The trench is the visible trace of that movement, a place where the surface has been folded into depth. It is not static, not finished, but part of an ongoing transformation that has shaped the ocean floor for millions of years. At its lowest point lies a region known as Challenger Deep. It is the deepest place in all of Earth's oceans, a location so far removed from the surface that distance begins to lose its usual meaning. If one were to imagine the tallest mountain placed within it, the peak would still remain far below the waves above. Depth here is not just a measurement, but a condition, one that reshapes everything that exists within it. The trench is often described as the most extreme environment on the surface of the planet. Pressure builds with every meter of descent, increasing until it reaches levels that would compress and fracture most materials brought down from above. Temperature remains just above freezing, held steady by the absence of sunlight and the slow movement of deep currents. Light itself does not reach these depths, leaving the environment in a constant state of darkness that has persisted for ages beyond counting. Because of these conditions, the Mariana Trench has come to be seen as one of the last true frontiers on Earth, not in the sense of distance alone, but in how little is known about it. The surface of the moon has been mapped in greater detail than parts of this underwater landscape. Exploration here is difficult, requiring specialized vessels that can withstand immense pressure while carrying instruments capable of capturing fragments of information from a place that resists observation. Even with modern technology, only a small portion of the trench has been directly explored. Expeditions are rare, brief, and often limited to narrow paths through a vast and largely unseen terrain. Each descent offers only a glimpse, a small window into an environment that extends far beyond the reach of any single journey. The majority of this world remains unvisited, its contours inferred rather than fully known. This limited access shapes how scientists understand the trench. Knowledge builds slowly, piece by piece, gathered from scattered observations and carefully interpreted data. There is a sense of distance, not just in space, but in understanding, as if the trench exists slightly beyond the edge of what can be fully grasped. Yet it is precisely this distance that draws attention. In a world where much has been measured and mapped, the Mariana Trench remains partially hidden, a place where the familiar rules of exploration feel less certain. It is not empty, not silent in the way it once seemed, but still largely unknown, holding within it a landscape shaped by forces that continue to unfold far beneath the surface. Long before cameras could drift freely through the deep, the first journeys downward were carried by cables, metal frames, and a quiet sense of uncertainty. Instruments were lowered slowly into the dark, returning with samples that felt almost accidental, as if something hidden had briefly brushed against the surface world. What came back was not what anyone had prepared for. Early expeditions were guided by a simple expectation: at such depths, under such immense pressure and isolation, life was assumed to fade away. The ocean floor far below was imagined as still and empty, a place where biological processes could no longer continue. The deeper the descent, the stronger that assumption became, reinforced by the absence of light and the growing distance from all known sources of energy. Yet when the first nets were drawn back up, they carried movement within them. Small fish appeared, their bodies delicate, yet intact. Shrimp-like creatures clung to the mesh, their limbs thin and oddly proportioned. Alongside them were softer forms, organisms without the firm structures familiar to surface biology, their shapes shifting slightly as they were brought into a world they were never meant to enter. These were not fragments or anomalies, but living beings, complete and functioning in ways that challenged every prior expectation. Some of these species bore only a faint resemblance to anything known. Their proportions seemed altered, their textures unfamiliar, their features arranged in ways that did not align with established categories. Where surface animals often carry symmetry and recognizable patterns, these creatures appeared shaped by different priorities, as though the usual rules had been rewritten in quiet isolation. The moment of recognition did not arrive all at once. It unfolded gradually as repeated descents brought back consistent evidence. Life was not only present, it was varied. Different forms appeared at different depths, each adapted in its own way, suggesting an ecosystem rather than a scattered collection of survivors. The idea of a lifeless deep ocean began to dissolve, replaced by something far more complex. This shift altered more than a single assumption. It reached into the foundations of how life itself was understood. Conditions once thought to be beyond biological tolerance were now clearly inhabited. Pressure, once seen as an absolute barrier, became instead a parameter that life could adapt to. Darkness, previously associated with absence, revealed itself as a constant rather than a limitation. Scientists began to reconsider the boundaries they had drawn. If life could exist here, in a place so distant from sunlight and so extreme in its physical conditions, then the range of possible environments for life expanded dramatically. The deep ocean was no longer an exception, but an extension, a continuation of biology into regions that had simply remained unseen. Each discovery carried a quiet weight. A single specimen, preserved and studied, suggested entire populations below. The presence of even one species implied networks of interaction, feeding, reproduction, and survival taking place far beyond direct observation. The trench was not silent in the way it had once been imagined, but active in ways that required new forms of attention to understand. Over time, these early findings became the foundation for deeper exploration. They shifted the purpose of each descent from searching for absence to documenting presence. The expectation of emptiness gave way to a recognition of hidden abundance, subtle and often difficult to detect, yet undeniably there. In this way, the first creatures brought to the surface did more than surprise those who found them. They opened a path toward a different understanding of the living world, one that extended downward into regions that had long remained outside of thought, waiting quietly beneath the surface. If a human hand could reach those depths unchanged, it would not remain a hand for long. The surrounding force would press inward from every direction at once, compressing, bending, and eventually breaking structures never designed for such weight. Even machines built with care and precision must be reinforced with thick walls and careful engineering to endure that descent, and still they are tested at every moment. Yet, within that same pressure, living bodies persist without fracture. The difference begins with what is absent rather than what is present. Surface life often carries pockets of gas within it, small spaces that allow for buoyancy, respiration, or movement. At great depth, such spaces would collapse instantly, leaving no room for error. The creatures that remain here have none of these vulnerabilities. Their forms are filled almost entirely with fluid, their tissues matching the density of the surrounding water so closely that pressure passes through them rather than crushing them. This quiet balance allows their bodies to exist in a state that appears soft, almost formless when brought into the light above. Bones, when they exist, are reduced and flexible. Hard edges are replaced by structures that yield rather than resist. Instead of rigid frames, there is a kind of living elasticity, a capacity to bend and return without breaking. It is not weakness but adaptation, a response shaped over long spans of time. At the cellular level, another adjustment unfolds. Proteins, the intricate molecules that carry out essential processes within living tissue, are sensitive to pressure. Under extreme conditions, their shapes can distort, losing the precise forms that allow them to function. Deep sea organisms counter this with subtle chemical changes. Their cells contain compounds that stabilize these proteins, holding them in place even as pressure increases far beyond what surface life could endure. These compounds, often small organic molecules, move quietly through the cells, reinforcing structures that would otherwise unravel. They do not make the organism rigid. Instead, they preserve flexibility while ensuring that vital reactions continue uninterrupted. Life here depends not on resisting the environment, but on aligning with it at the smallest scales. The absence of air, the presence of fluid-filled tissues, and the stability of internal chemistry combine to create bodies that behave differently from those familiar above. When these organisms are brought to the surface, removed from the pressure that supports their form, they can appear altered. Their tissues may expand slightly, their shapes shifting in ways that seem unusual or even distorted. What appears strange in that moment is simply the result of leaving the conditions they were shaped for. In their own environment, these forms are precise. Each contour, each softness, reflects a balance between internal structure and external force. There is no excess rigidity, no unnecessary density. Everything is arranged to exist within a constant, overwhelming pressure that becomes, in time, simply another aspect of being. Through this lens, the deep ocean reveals a different approach to survival. Instead of building strength through hardness, life here endures through flexibility and quiet resilience. The bodies that might seem fragile at first glance are, in truth, finely tuned systems, capable of withstanding conditions that would dismantle more familiar forms. There are moments in the deep when something appears where nothing should be seen, a faint shimmer forming in the distance, then fading before it can be fully understood. In a place untouched by sunlight, visibility does not vanish entirely. It is rewritten. No rays from above reach these depths. The long journey of sunlight through water ends far above, absorbed layer by layer, until nothing remains. What exists instead is a darkness that has never been interrupted, not even once. Within that continuity, certain organisms carry their own answer to absence, producing light from within their bodies through quiet chemical reactions. This process, known as bioluminescence, emerges from the interaction of specific molecules. A light emitting compound reacts with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme, releasing energy not as heat, but as a soft glow. The efficiency of this reaction is remarkable, nearly all energy converted into light. It is a controlled emission, often cool in tone, tending toward shades of blue that travel most effectively through seawater. The ways this light is used vary across species, shaped by different needs within the same darkness. Some creatures extend small, luminous structures into the water, delicate filaments that drift just ahead of their bodies. These glowing points attract smaller organisms, drawing them closer without revealing the form that waits behind the light. The movement is subtle, the intention precise, a quiet method of hunting that relies on curiosity rather than pursuit. Elsewhere, light becomes a form of concealment. Certain animals produce illumination along their undersides, matching the faint traces of brightness that descend from far above. This soft glow erases their silhouette when viewed from below, blending them into the dim background. Predators looking upward find no clear outline, only a continuation of the surrounding dimness. Communication unfolds through patterns that shift in time. Some species emit brief flashes, controlled pulses that repeat with careful rhythm. Others maintain a steady glow, constant and low, marking their presence without drawing unnecessary attention. These signals can indicate readiness to reproduce, establish territory, or simply maintain awareness of others nearby. In an environment where visibility is rare, even a small point of light carries meaning. The appearance of these luminous bodies often seems unfamiliar when observed outside their natural setting. Colors that appear vivid in darkness can look pale under stronger illumination. Shapes that rely on shadow and contrast lose their context when brought into brighter environments. What once blended seamlessly into a dark expanse can seem exaggerated or unusual when removed from it. Yet within their own world, these forms are balanced. The glow is neither excessive nor decorative. It is measured, tuned to distance, absorption, and the sensitivity of nearby eyes. Each emission of light serves a function, integrated into behavior and survival without waste. In this way, the deep ocean holds a different kind of visibility, one not dependent on external sources. Light becomes a product of life itself, shaped and released in controlled moments, never overwhelming the surrounding darkness. It does not fill the space, but punctuates it, brief and deliberate, like quiet signals exchanged in a place where illumination is a choice rather than a constant. In a world where sight can no longer rely on brightness, the meaning of seeing begins to shift. Vision does not disappear entirely, but it changes direction, sensitivity, and even purpose, shaped by conditions that remove the familiar reference of daylight. Some creatures retain eyes, though not in the form most would recognize. Their vision becomes tuned to the smallest traces of illumination, capable of detecting faint glimmers that drift from distant layers above. These eyes often grow larger in proportion to the body, gathering what little light exists and concentrating it with quiet precision. The structures within them, delicate and highly specialized, amplify subtle signals that would pass unnoticed elsewhere. In certain species, the orientation of the eyes reflects this upward search. Rather than facing forward or to the sides, they angle toward the distant ceiling of water, positioned to capture the dimmest outlines moving far above. A passing shadow, a slight interruption in the faint glow filtering down from higher levels, becomes enough to signal the presence of another organism. Detection here is less about clarity and more about contrast, about noticing absence within a nearly uniform field. Other forms take a different path entirely, gradually losing their eyes over generations. In an environment where light provides little advantage, maintaining complex visual systems becomes energetically costly. Structures that no longer serve a clear function begin to reduce, simplified or removed through slow evolutionary change. In their place, other senses expand, taking on roles once associated with vision. There are also bodies in which the eyes remain, yet appear altered in their placement and protection. Some creatures possess transparent or semi-transparent tissues that form dome-like coverings over their visual organs. Within these fluid-filled chambers, the eyes sit shielded yet unobstructed, able to move and adjust while remaining protected from the surrounding conditions. This arrangement creates an unusual appearance, as though the eyes exist within a clear enclosure, observing from within rather than directly exposed. The fluid surrounding these eyes serves more than a protective role. It maintains internal pressure balance and allows delicate structures to function without distortion. Light, when it arrives, passes through this medium with minimal disruption, reaching the receptors in a controlled and stable way. The result is a system adapted not for abundance, but for scarcity, where even the faintest signal is preserved. As these variations accumulate, vision becomes less about forming detailed images and more about interpreting minimal cues. Movement, shadow, and slight changes in brightness carry greater importance than color or sharpness. The visual world narrows, focusing on what can be detected rather than what can be clearly seen. In this setting, evolution does not follow a single path. Some species refine their ability to perceive the smallest hints of light, while others abandon vision in favor of alternative senses. Each approach reflects a different balance between energy, function, and the conditions surrounding them. The result is a collection of forms that appear unfamiliar when compared to those shaped by brighter environments. Eyes that seem oversized, misplaced, or absent altogether are not deviations without purpose, but expressions of adaptation to a world where light is limited and often indirect. Through these changes, vision persists in a quieter form. It becomes less dominant, less relied upon, yet still present in ways that align with the environment. Seeing, in this context, is not about clarity or color, but about the ability to register subtle differences in a space where even the smallest signal can hold meaning. Hunger is not a passing sensation, but a condition that shapes the body itself. It lingers through long intervals, where nothing arrives, where the surrounding water carries only sparse traces of nourishment. In such a setting, the act of feeding becomes rare enough that each opportunity must be used fully without hesitation or waste. Many of the creatures that live here reflect this reality in the proportions of their bodies. Their mouths extend far beyond what would seem balanced, stretching wide relative to their size. The jaw structures are not fixed in tight alignment, but connected by flexible joints and ligaments that allow them to open to unusual degrees. This flexibility is not an exaggeration, but a precise response, enabling the capture of anything that comes within reach. Teeth, when present, often curve inward, forming a kind of barrier that prevents escape once prey has been taken in. They are not designed for chewing in the traditional sense, but for holding, securing, ensuring that movement continues in only one direction. The process is deliberate, slow, and controlled, guided by structures that favor certainty over speed. Behind the mouth, another adaptation unfolds. The stomach is capable of expanding far beyond its resting size, unfolding gradually as it receives more than the body might seem able to contain. Tissues stretch without tearing, accommodating meals that may equal or exceed the creature's own mass. This capacity allows a single feeding event to sustain the organism for extended periods, storing energy that will be used slowly over time. Such adaptations create a form that appears disproportionate when viewed outside its context. A small body paired with an expansive mouth, a slender frame concealing a stomach capable of great enlargement, features that seem mismatched when compared to more familiar organisms. Yet within this environment, these proportions are balanced, each element serving a clear and necessary function. The scarcity of food defines this balance. Encounters between predator and prey are infrequent, shaped by distance and the slow movement of currents. There is little opportunity for repeated attempts. A missed chance cannot be easily replaced, and the cost of failure extends beyond a single moment. Energy spent in pursuit must be recovered, and without a successful capture, that recovery becomes uncertain. Because of this, feeding strategies favor certainty over selectivity. Creatures do not specialize in narrow diets, but remain capable of consuming whatever size or form presents itself. The ability to take in larger prey increases the likelihood that any encounter will result in nourishment sufficient to last through the next period of absence. Over time, these conditions guide the development of forms that prioritize intake and storage. Growth is not directed toward speed or agility, but toward maximizing the value of rare events. Each successful feeding becomes a quiet reserve, carried within the body and drawn upon gradually as the surrounding environment returns to its usual stillness. In this way, the large mouths and expandable interiors are not excess but necessity. They reflect a world where abundance does not come in steady streams, but in brief, unpredictable moments. Life continues here by preparing for those moments, by shaping itself around the certainty that when food arrives, it must be enough. Time, in this depth, does not pass in the way it does above. It stretches, lengthens, and settles into a rhythm that feels almost suspended. Movement becomes something rare and measured, unfolding so gradually that it can seem as though nothing is happening at all. Energy here is not readily available, and every motion carries a cost that cannot be easily repaid. As a result, many creatures reduce their activity to the smallest possible range. Instead of constant swimming, they allow themselves to drift, guided by faint currents that move slowly through the water. Fins, when used, make only slight adjustments, correcting direction rather than driving it. This drifting is not aimless. It is a form of conservation, a way of remaining present within the environment without expending unnecessary effort. The body becomes part of the surrounding flow, responding to subtle changes rather than forcing its own path. Over time, this approach shapes behavior into something quiet and continuous, where stillness holds as much importance as motion. Inside these organisms, The same principle continues. Metabolism slows to a pace that matches the scarcity of available resources. Chemical processes that, in other environments, would proceed quickly are extended over longer intervals. Growth becomes gradual, unfolding across spans of time that would seem unusual elsewhere. Even the act of consuming stored energy is measured, each reserve used carefully to sustain life through extended periods without replenishment. This slower internal rhythm influences how these creatures interact with their surroundings. Encounters are infrequent, and responses are deliberate. There is little urgency in movement, no sudden bursts of activity unless absolutely necessary. The environment does not reward haste, and so haste fades from the range of possible behaviors. As a result, the space itself begins to feel still, though it is not truly empty. Organisms remain present, suspended within the water, their forms barely shifting as time moves around them. The absence of rapid motion creates a kind of quiet continuity where changes occur but do so at a scale that resists immediate perception. This stillness is reinforced by the lack of external disturbances. Without strong currents or frequent interactions, the environment maintains a steady state. Small particles drift slowly, settling and rising in patterns that repeat without interruption. Creatures pass one another without collision, their paths crossing gently, often without direct contact. Within this setting, life persists not through constant activity, but through balance. Each organism aligns its behavior with the limited energy available, maintaining a steady presence rather than a dynamic one. Survival depends on minimizing loss, on extending each action across time rather than compressing it into brief moments. The result is a world that moves, but does so quietly. Changes accumulate gradually, visible only when observed over extended periods. A shift in position, a slight adjustment of form, a slow approach toward or away from another presence all unfold without urgency. In this way, the deep ocean becomes a place where motion and stillness are closely intertwined. Activity is not absent, but softened, stretched, and distributed across time. Life continues, not through speed or intensity, but through a sustained calm that allows it to endure within an environment where energy is always limited and rarely renewed. Nothing grows here in the way growth is usually understood. There are no fields of movement shaped by light, no steady production of energy rising from a local source. Instead, nourishment begins far above, drifting downward through layers of water, thinning as it travels, becoming something faint long before it arrives. What reaches these depths often comes in fragments. Tiny particles descend slowly, a fine rain composed of organic remains, shed material, and microscopic life that has completed its cycle elsewhere. This continuous fall, sometimes called marine snow, accumulates with quiet persistence, settling onto bodies and seafloor alike. Each particle carries only a small amount of energy, yet, over time, these small contributions sustain entire communities. For many organisms, this gentle descent forms the primary source of nutrition. They filter the water or gather what settles, extracting value from material that appears almost insignificant. Feeding becomes an act of patience, a steady collection rather than a sudden gain. The process is slow, aligned with the pace of the environment, allowing life to continue on minimal input. Yet, this steady supply is never abundant. The distance from its origin ensures that much is lost along the way, consumed or dispersed before it can reach the deepest regions. What remains is enough to sustain, but rarely enough to support rapid growth or frequent activity. Long intervals pass with little change, where intake barely balances the energy required to remain alive. During these extended periods, organisms rely on conservation. Internal reserves are managed carefully, each unit of stored energy used with restraint. Activity diminishes further, and the body enters a state of quiet endurance. Survival becomes less about acquiring new resources and more about extending what has already been gathered. Then, on rare occasions, something larger arrives. A carcass from above, perhaps a fish or a drifting mammal, descends through the water column and reaches the depths intact. When it settles, it introduces a sudden concentration of nutrients into a space that has known only scarcity. The surrounding environment responds, not with haste, but with a gradual gathering. Creatures approach, drawn by chemical traces carried through the water, converging from distances that would otherwise keep them apart. These events transform the immediate area. What was once sparse becomes temporarily rich, supporting feeding behaviors that are otherwise uncommon. Organisms consume as much as they can, storing energy within their bodies, preparing for the return of quiet conditions. The resource is finite, and once it is exhausted, the environment returns to its usual state of limitation. Such moments are infrequent, separated by spans of time that reinforce their importance. The possibility of a large food fall influences how organisms are shaped, encouraging traits that allow them to take full advantage when opportunity appears. Storage capacity, flexible feeding mechanisms, and the ability to detect distant signals all become essential features. In the absence of consistent abundance, scarcity becomes the defining force. It guides behavior, structure, and internal processes, shaping life into forms that can endure long stretches of minimal input while remaining ready for brief periods of excess. Through this balance, the deep ocean sustains itself. It does not rely on continuous production within its own boundaries, but on a distant connection to worlds above. What falls is often small, sometimes significant, and always uncertain. Life persists by adapting to that uncertainty, existing within a system where arrival is rare, and absence is the norm. At long intervals, the quiet pattern of scarcity is interrupted by a single arrival that alters everything around it. The descent is slow and unobserved, a large body settling through layers until it reaches a depth where little else gathers. When it comes to rest, it introduces a concentration of nutrients unlike anything normally present in this environment. The first response is subtle. Chemical traces begin to diffuse outward, carried along faint currents that extend far beyond the immediate area. These signals move silently, reaching organisms that would otherwise remain separated by distance. One by one, they begin to adjust their direction, drawn toward a source they cannot yet see. As more individuals arrive, the stillness that usually defines this world begins to shift. Movement increases, not in sudden bursts, but in a steady convergence. Creatures that rarely encounter one another now share the same space, their paths crossing as they approach the same point. The environment becomes briefly populated, filled with activity that contrasts with its usual calm. Once contact is made, feeding begins without delay. Different species engage in the process according to their own structures and abilities, each interacting with the resource in a distinct way. Some remove soft tissue from the surface, while others access deeper layers, working gradually through the material. The carcass becomes a focal point, supporting a range of feeding behaviors that unfold simultaneously. This gathering forms a temporary system, an arrangement of interactions that persists only as long as the resource remains. Smaller organisms feed alongside larger ones, while microorganisms begin to break down what cannot be consumed directly. Layers of activity develop, each contributing to the gradual transformation of the original form into smaller and more dispersed components. Within this shared space, competition emerges naturally. Access to the resource is limited, and proximity becomes an advantage. Creatures position themselves carefully, maintaining contact or remaining close enough to return quickly. Encounters occur as individuals adjust their place within the gathering, not through conflict alone, but through a continuous negotiation of space and opportunity. Despite this increased activity, the process remains measured. There is no excess movement, no wasted effort. Each action is directed toward maximizing intake, storing energy that will be used long after the resource is gone. The pace reflects both urgency and restraint, shaped by the knowledge, carried in instinct, that such events are rare. Over time, the carcass diminishes. Larger sections are consumed first, followed by smaller remnants that continue to support life at a reduced scale. Even after the visible structure has been altered beyond recognition, the area retains traces of its presence. Residual material continues to provide nourishment, extending the influence of the original event. Eventually, the gathering disperses. Organisms move away, returning to their previous ranges, carrying with them the energy acquired during this brief period of abundance. The environment gradually returns to its earlier state, with distance once again separating individuals and activity diminishing to its usual level. These events leave lasting effects beyond their immediate duration. They shape how organisms are built and how they behave, reinforcing traits that allow them to locate, access, and make full use of such rare opportunities. Survival becomes closely tied to these moments, not as isolated occurrences, but as defining features of life in this environment. In this way, the deep ocean sustains itself through intervals of concentration and absence, where brief gatherings around a single source ripple outward, influencing patterns that extend far beyond the moment itself. A body passes nearby, and for a moment, it is only noticed by the slight distortion it creates, a subtle bending of what little light exists, a presence revealed not by color but by absence. Its outline does not stand apart from its surroundings in the way familiar forms do. Instead, it seems to merge with the water itself, as though the boundary between organism and environment has been softened. In many of these creatures, pigmentation has been reduced to the point of near disappearance. Without consistent illumination, the biological processes that produce color lose their relevance. Pigments often serve functions tied to light, protection from radiation, signaling, or concealment against visible backgrounds. In a setting where these pressures no longer apply, maintaining such features offers little advantage. Over long spans of time, this lack of necessity shapes the body at a fundamental level. Cells no longer invest energy in producing complex pigments. Tissues become clearer, less dense in coloration, allowing whatever faint light is present to pass through rather than reflect. The result is a form that appears pale, sometimes almost glass-like, its surface offering little resistance to visibility. This transparency can extend beyond the outer layer. In certain species, internal structures are partially visible through the body wall, revealing organs in motion, fluids circulating, processes continuing quietly beneath the surface. The organism does not conceal these systems, because concealment through color has ceased to be meaningful. Instead, its internal arrangement exists in plain view, though softened by the medium through which it is seen. Such bodies interact with their surroundings in a way that reduces contrast. Without strong coloration, there are fewer visual cues to distinguish the organism from the water around it. Edges become less defined, shapes less pronounced. Detection becomes more difficult, not because the organism actively hides, but because it does not stand out. This form of near invisibility is not absolute. Subtle reflections, faint outlines, or slight movements can still reveal presence. Yet these signals are minimal, often requiring proximity or specific conditions to be noticed. In a space where interactions are infrequent, reducing visibility even slightly can influence survival. The internal composition of these bodies also reflects this simplicity. Without the need to support pigment structures, tissues can remain thinner and more uniform. This contributes to an overall reduction in material complexity, aligning with the broader pattern of conserving resources wherever possible. What is not required is gradually removed, leaving behind forms that are efficient and direct. In contrast to environments shaped by light, where color plays a central role in communication and identity, these organisms exist without such visual language. They do not rely on appearance to signal presence, status, or intent. Their interactions are guided by other means, subtle, and often imperceptible to human senses. As a result, their bodies seem unfamiliar, not because they are incomplete, but because they reflect a different set of priorities. The absence of color is not a deficiency, but an adjustment, a quiet response to conditions that render pigmentation unnecessary. Through this gradual refinement, life in the deep ocean adopts forms that approach invisibility, not as a deliberate disguise, but as a natural outcome of existing in a world where light no longer defines how a body is seen. A slight contact would not meet resistance in the way one might expect. Instead of firmness, there is a yielding surface, a body that gives way gently and then settles back into shape, as though it were part of the surrounding water rather than separate from it. Form is present, yet it does not assert itself through hardness. Many organisms at these depths are built with minimal reliance on rigid frameworks. Bones, where they exist, are reduced in density and prominence, no longer serving as the primary support structure for the body. In some cases, they are so diminished that they function more as internal guides than as load-bearing elements. This shift allows the organism to avoid the stresses that rigid materials would experience under constant external force. In place of solid structure, water becomes an integral component of the body itself. Tissues are saturated, composed largely of fluid that mirrors the density of the surrounding environment. This balance reduces internal strain, as there is little difference between the pressure inside the organism and the pressure outside it. The body does not resist its surroundings, but aligns with them, maintaining stability through equilibrium rather than opposition. This composition gives rise to forms that appear soft and delicate when observed outside their natural conditions. Edges seem less defined, movements less constrained, as though the body is held together by a gentle cohesion rather than firm boundaries. Muscles operate within this softness, generating motion without the need for rigid anchors, allowing for slow and controlled adjustments in position. The absence of stiffness offers distinct advantages. Under immense pressure, rigid structures can fracture or deform, unable to distribute force evenly. Softer bodies, by contrast, allow pressure to pass through them without concentrating stress in any single area. This reduces the risk of structural failure, enabling the organism to maintain its integrity even in conditions that would compromise more solid forms. At a microscopic level, This softness is supported by the arrangement of cells and the materials that surround them. Connective tissues are less fibrous, more flexible, allowing for movement and deformation without damage. Fluids within the body contribute to this flexibility, acting as both support and buffer, maintaining shape while permitting change. The result is a kind of structural fluidity, where the body retains its overall form but can adapt to subtle variations in its environment. Movement does not rely on forceful contractions or rapid changes, but on gradual shifts, guided by the interplay between muscle, tissue, and the surrounding medium. This creates a style of motion that is continuous and unhurried, consistent with the broader rhythm of life at depth. Such forms may seem fragile when compared to those built on rigid frameworks, yet this fragility is only apparent when removed from context. Within their own environment, these organisms are precisely suited to the conditions they inhabit. Their softness is not a limitation, but a solution, one that allows them to exist without conflict with the forces around them. Through this adaptation, the concept of strength takes on a different meaning. It is no longer defined by resistance or solidity, but by the ability to remain intact through flexibility and balance. The body becomes less like a fixed structure and more like a living extension of the environment itself, shaped to endure, not by opposing pressure, but by quietly accommodating it. A faint disturbance passes through the water, too subtle to be seen, yet enough to alter the position of a nearby body by the smallest fraction. That shift is received, not through sight, but through structures, attuned to motion itself, delicate systems that register changes in pressure and flow as information. Many organisms here rely on mechanoreception, the ability to detect vibrations and fluid movement along the surface of the body. Fine sensory cells respond to passing waves, translating them into signals that indicate direction, size, and proximity. A movement made by another creature, even at some distance, leaves a trace in the surrounding water, a pattern that can be followed without any need for visual confirmation. These signals are not constant, but when they appear, they carry meaning. A slow drift produces one pattern, a sudden motion another. By distinguishing between these variations, a predator can identify potential prey, sensing its presence through the disturbances it creates. The water itself becomes a medium of communication, carrying information outward in expanding forms that gradually fade. Alongside this sensitivity to movement, chemical detection plays an equally important role. Molecules released by living organisms disperse into the surrounding environment, forming gradients that can be traced. Specialized receptors allow certain species to perceive these gradients, identifying the direction from which they originate. The process is gradual, requiring careful interpretation, but it provides a reliable guide toward a source that cannot be seen. As these chemical traces spread, they mix with the surrounding water, becoming more diffuse over time. Yet even faint concentrations can be enough. By moving slowly and adjusting direction in response to changing intensity, an organism can follow this invisible trail, narrowing the distance until contact becomes possible. Because these methods do not rely on direct observation, hunting often takes the form of waiting rather than active pursuit. Movement is minimized, reducing the chance of creating detectable disturbances. The body remains still, positioned within an area where signals are likely to pass. When a vibration or chemical cue indicates proximity, the response is measured and precise, a controlled action timed to coincide with the moment of opportunity. This approach conserves energy while increasing the likelihood of success. Instead of searching actively through a vast environment, the organism allows information to come to it, responding only when necessary. The strategy reflects the broader conditions of the deep, where efficiency is essential and unnecessary movement carries a cost. The senses involved in this process operate beyond familiar human experience. They do not form images or sounds in the conventional sense, but rather construct an understanding of the environment through patterns and gradients. Movement, position, and presence are inferred from subtle variations that would otherwise go unnoticed. Through this combination of mechanoreception and chemical sensing, hunting becomes an act of interpretation. The predator reads the surrounding water, identifying meaningful signals within a continuous flow of information. Each detection is followed by a response shaped by experience and adaptation, guiding behavior in a space where direct perception is limited. In this way, life continues without reliance on vision, using alternative pathways to achieve the same essential outcome. The absence of sight does not prevent interaction, but transforms it, leading to strategies that are quieter, slower, and deeply attuned to the properties of the environment itself. Growth begins here as a nearly imperceptible process, unfolding in increments so small that change can pass unnoticed across long spans. A young organism does not rush toward maturity. Instead, it advances gradually, its development paced by conditions that do not favor speed. Tissue forms, expands, and refines itself with careful economy, each stage extending far beyond what would be expected in more active environments. This slow growth is closely tied to the stability of the surroundings. Variations in temperature are minimal, and external disturbances remain rare. Without frequent shifts to respond to, organisms are not pressed into rapid cycles of development. Their internal rhythms align with this steadiness, allowing life processes to proceed without urgency. The passage from one stage to another becomes a quiet transition rather than a defined event. Over time, this measured pace contributes to extended lifespans. Many species persist far longer than their counterparts in regions where change is constant. The absence of rapid growth does not limit longevity, but supports it, reducing the strain placed on biological systems. Cells divide less frequently, metabolic processes remain subdued, and wear accumulates at a slower rate. Predation, while present, does not dominate the environment in the same way it does elsewhere. Encounters between organisms occur less often, shaped by distance and the low density of life. As a result, individuals may exist for long periods without facing immediate threats. Survival is influenced less by sudden interactions and more by the ability to endure over time. This combination of factors creates a sense in which aging itself feels altered. Changes that would be noticeable over short intervals in other settings become distributed across much longer durations. Physical transformations occur, but they do so gradually, often blending into the background of ongoing existence. An organism may carry the marks of time, yet these marks emerge so slowly that they remain subtle. Internally, this extended timeline is reflected in how energy is used. Resources are allocated with precision, supporting maintenance and repair over extended periods. The body does not expend excess energy on rapid growth or frequent reproduction, but instead sustains itself steadily, preserving function across years that extend beyond typical expectations. Reproduction, when it occurs, often follows this same pattern of patience. Intervals between reproductive events can be long, with each event representing a significant investment. Offspring develop under similar constraints, entering a world where time unfolds at a different pace, guided by the same underlying conditions. As these patterns persist, the concept of time within this environment becomes less tied to immediate change and more to continuity. Life does not progress through rapid cycles, but through extended phases that overlap and blend into one another. The distinction between youth and maturity, between growth and stability, becomes less pronounced. Through this lens, aging is not a process marked by clear stages, but a gradual accumulation of subtle changes. The body adapts to this pace, maintaining its integrity over durations that would seem unusual in more dynamic settings. What might be considered slow elsewhere becomes the natural rhythm here, shaping lives that extend quietly through time. In this way, the deep ocean supports a form of existence where longevity is not driven by resistance to change, but by alignment with an environment that itself remains steady. Time does not accelerate or compress, but stretches outward, allowing life to persist in a state of continuous, measured progression. Across wide stretches of water, individuals exist without ever encountering another of their kind for long periods. Presence is scattered, not clustered, and the likelihood of two compatible organisms crossing paths at the right moment remains low. Reproduction, which elsewhere may rely on proximity and frequent interaction, becomes a rare alignment of timing, location, and chance. The difficulty begins with distance. Populations are not dense, and movement does not rapidly bridge gaps between individuals. An organism may spend much of its life without direct contact with a potential mate, navigating an environment where encounters are infrequent and unpredictable. This separation places constraints on how reproduction can occur, shaping behaviors and biological systems in response. Some species rely on chemical signaling to increase the likelihood of contact. Subtle compounds are released into the surrounding water, carried outward by slow currents. These signals persist, forming gradients that can be detected over distance. When another individual senses such a trail, it may adjust its path, moving gradually toward the source. The process is uncertain, influenced by the shifting movement of water, yet it provides a means of connection in an otherwise dispersed setting. Other organisms adopt strategies that reduce the need for repeated encounters. In certain cases, once a meeting occurs, it is extended indefinitely. A smaller individual may attach to a larger one, becoming a permanent partner rather than a temporary presence. Over time, their biological systems integrate, ensuring that reproduction can continue without the need for further searching. This arrangement reflects a solution to rarity, transforming a single encounter into a lasting association. There are also species capable of reproducing without a partner at all. Through processes such as parthenogenesis, an individual can produce offspring independently, bypassing the need for external fertilization. While this limits genetic variation, it allows life to persist in conditions where finding a mate may be unlikely. The trade-off reflects a balance between adaptability and certainty, favoring continuation over diversity when circumstances demand it. Timing adds another layer of complexity. Even when individuals exist within relative proximity, reproductive readiness must align. Biological cycles, influenced by internal and environmental factors, determine when reproduction can occur. In a setting where encounters are rare, misalignment can result in missed opportunities, further reducing the chances of successful reproduction. As these challenges accumulate, reproductive strategies become more specialized. Energy investment is carefully managed, with each reproductive event carrying significant importance. Offspring may be fewer in number, but supported with greater resources, increasing their likelihood of survival. The emphasis shifts from quantity to precision, from frequent reproduction to carefully timed events. Through these adaptations, life continues despite the constraints imposed by distance and scarcity. Reproduction remains possible, though it unfolds through methods that differ from those found in more densely populated environments. Each strategy reflects a response to the same underlying condition, a world where individuals are separated by vast spaces and encounters cannot be taken for granted. In this way, the act of finding a mate becomes one of the most demanding aspects of existence. It requires not only the presence of another organism, but the convergence of multiple factors that must align within a narrow window. The solutions that emerge are varied, each shaped by the need to overcome isolation while preserving the continuity of life. Pressure carries motion through water in ways that do not resemble the sounds known at the surface. What might be called sound does not arrive as a clear sequence of tones, but as a shifting pattern of compressions moving through a dense medium, spreading outward in all directions. In this environment, the concept of hearing changes, shaped by the properties of the water itself. At great depth, sound travels efficiently, maintaining its strength across long distances. Lower frequencies, in particular, move with little loss, passing through layers without being scattered. Yet this does not create a landscape filled with recognizable noise. Instead, the signals that persist are often subtle, embedded within the continuous movement of the surrounding water. For many organisms, perception of these signals does not rely on ears in the familiar sense. Instead, the body itself becomes a receptive surface. Specialized sensory structures detect minute changes in pressure, registering disturbances that pass through the water as variations in force. These changes may originate from movement, from shifting currents, or from the presence of another organism nearby. This form of perception emphasizes sensitivity over clarity. Rather than identifying distinct sounds, the organism interprets patterns of vibration, recognizing differences in intensity, direction, and frequency. A small motion can produce a detectable signal, and the ability to respond to such signals becomes essential. The body is tuned to notice these variations, translating them into meaningful information. As a result, the environment may appear quiet, yet it is not without activity. Signals are constantly present, though they do not manifest as audible sound. Instead, they move through the water as continuous fluctuations, forming a background of subtle changes that can be read by those equipped to do so. What seems silent is, in practice, filled with information. The absence of conventional sound alters how organisms interact. Communication, when it occurs, is often based on these vibrations rather than on distinct calls or signals. Movements generate patterns that can be perceived by others, allowing for a form of exchange that does not depend on air or vocalization. This method is less about projecting a message and more about creating a detectable presence within the surrounding medium. Sensitivity to these signals requires precise adaptation. Sensory cells must be capable of responding to very small changes, distinguishing meaningful patterns from the constant background movement. This selectivity allows organisms to focus on relevant information, filtering out variations that do not indicate the presence of another life form. In this setting, perception becomes distributed across the body. Instead of relying on a single organ, multiple regions contribute to the detection of movement and pressure. This creates a more integrated form of awareness, where the organism experiences its surroundings as a continuous field of variation rather than a series of discrete events. Through this system, the deep ocean maintains a form of communication and detection that differs from surface environments. Sound, as it is commonly understood, does not dominate, In its place, vibration and pressure provide the primary means of interaction, shaping how life perceives and responds to its surroundings. The result is an environment that feels quiet when considered through familiar senses, yet remains active through mechanisms that operate beyond them. Signals move, patterns form, and organisms respond, all within a medium where hearing has been redefined by the conditions that surround it. A single molecule released into the water does not remain where it begins. It disperses, carried outward by slow movement, forming a faint gradient that stretches across distance. What begins as a localized presence becomes a field of information, spreading quietly through the surrounding environment. For many organisms in this depth, perception begins with these chemical traces. Receptors along the body detect dissolved compounds, registering their presence at extremely low concentrations. This sensitivity allows the organism to interpret variations in the surrounding water, identifying subtle differences that indicate the origin of a signal. Food can be located in this way, not through direct observation, but through the gradual following of a chemical path. As organic material releases compounds into the water, those compounds diffuse outward, forming a trail that weakens with distance but remains detectable. By moving in response to changes in concentration, an organism can trace this gradient, narrowing the path toward its source. This process requires continuous adjustment. The gradient is rarely uniform, shaped by currents that shift and redirect the movement of molecules. The organism responds by altering its course, comparing concentrations across its sensory surfaces, and orienting itself toward higher intensity. The movement is slow and deliberate, guided not by a clear line, but by a pattern that must be interpreted over time. The same principles apply to locating other individuals. Chemical signals associated with reproduction are released into the water, forming dispersed markers of presence. These signals do not travel as discrete messages, but as continuous fields that indicate proximity and readiness. When detected, they provide a means of connection in an environment where visual contact is limited. Because these signals can persist and spread over distance, they enable a form of long-range communication. An organism does not need to be close to another to become aware of it. Instead, the presence of specific compounds can indicate that another individual exists within the surrounding area, even if it remains physically distant. This reliance on chemical information shifts the role of perception. Rather than forming images or relying on direct contact, organisms construct an understanding of their environment through gradients and distributions. The water becomes a medium, not only for movement, but for the transmission of information, carrying signals that can be detected and interpreted. Sensitivity to these signals is often highly refined. Receptors are tuned to specific compounds, allowing organisms to distinguish between different sources. This selectivity ensures that responses are directed toward relevant signals, reducing the influence of background variation. The ability to filter and interpret these chemical cues becomes essential for survival. As a result, smell, in a broad sense, becomes one of the primary ways in which the environment is experienced. It does not function as it does in air, but as a continuous sampling of the surrounding medium, detecting changes in composition that reveal the presence of food, mates, or other organisms. Through this chemical language, interactions occur without the need for light or direct proximity. Signals move outward, organisms respond, and connections form across distances that would otherwise remain empty. The process is gradual and often invisible, yet it provides a consistent means of navigation and communication. In this way, the deep ocean supports a form of awareness built on diffusion and detection, where meaning is carried not by sight or sound, but by the quiet movement of molecules through water. What sustains life here often begins far beyond this depth, shaped in regions that will never come into direct view. Processes unfolding near the surface, guided by light and movement, create material that eventually descends, carrying with it the energy required to support distant ecosystems below. This connection is not immediate. Organic matter forms in upper layers of the ocean, produced through biological activity that depends on conditions absent in the deep. When organisms complete their life cycles or release particles into the water, those materials begin a gradual descent. Along the way, they are altered, consumed, and reduced, so that what finally reaches the depths is only a fraction of what once existed above. Despite this reduction, the arriving material remains essential. It provides the primary source of energy for organisms that have no direct access to production within their own environment. Each particle represents a transfer, linking two distant regions through a continuous but uneven exchange. The deep ocean does not generate its own abundance, but receives it in diminished form, shaped by processes occurring far away. This dependence creates a relationship that is both stable and delicate. As long as material continues to descend, life can persist, maintaining a balance between intake and use. Yet, the supply is not constant. Variations in surface conditions, changes in biological activity, and shifts in ocean circulation can all influence the amount of material that reaches the depths. Because of this, the ecosystem must remain adaptable. Organisms are structured to function with limited and fluctuating input, capable of enduring periods when the arrival of resources decreases. This adaptability allows life to continue even when the connection to the surface becomes less reliable. At the same time, the link between these distant regions remains essential. Without the transfer of material from above, the deep environment would lack the energy required to sustain its communities. The connection is indirect, yet fundamental, shaping the structure and behavior of organisms that depend on it. This relationship extends beyond individual organisms to the entire system. Interactions within the deep are influenced by the availability of resources that originate elsewhere. Patterns of movement, growth, and reproduction all reflect the influence of material that arrives from above, even though its origin remains far removed from the environment in which it is used. The fragility of this system becomes apparent when considering how dependent it is on processes beyond its immediate control. A change in one region can have consequences in another, creating a chain of influence that extends across depth and distance. The deep ocean, though isolated in many ways, remains connected to the broader dynamics of the planet. Through this connection, life in the trench is shaped by events it does not directly experience. The presence or absence of resources reflects conditions that occur far above, linking environments that might otherwise seem entirely separate. This creates a continuity between surface and depth, a shared system in which energy moves downward and is transformed along the way. In this way, the deep ocean exists as part of a larger network, sustained by distant processes and maintained through a delicate balance. Life continues not through independence, but through reliance on a connection that spans the full vertical range of the ocean, linking worlds that remain far apart yet fundamentally intertwined. Two organisms remain in close contact, their boundaries distinct yet their functions intertwined, forming an association that neither maintains alone. In these depths, such partnerships arise not from proximity alone, but from the advantages gained when different forms of life align their abilities. Many of these relationships involve microorganisms that exist within or upon larger hosts. Bacteria, in particular, play a central role, inhabiting tissues or external surfaces where they carry out processes the host cannot perform independently. These microscopic partners transform available substances into usable forms, providing nutrients that would otherwise remain inaccessible. In some cases, this exchange is highly specific. The host offers a stable environment, a place where the bacteria can exist with consistent access to the materials they require. In return, the bacteria process compounds present in the surrounding environment, converting them into energy-rich molecules that sustain both themselves and their host. The relationship becomes continuous, each participant contributing to a shared system of survival. This form of symbiosis extends beyond simple exchange. Structures may develop within the host to accommodate these microbial communities, creating specialized spaces where interaction can occur efficiently. These areas maintain conditions suitable for the bacteria, regulating factors such as concentration and flow, ensuring that the partnership remains balanced. Other associations involve cooperation between larger organisms. Different species may occupy the same area, each fulfilling a role that supports the other. One may provide access to a resource, while the other offers protection or assists in processing that resource. These interactions are often subtle, not marked by direct communication, but by consistent patterns of behavior that benefit both participants. Such arrangements reduce the burden placed on any single organism. Instead of evolving all necessary functions independently, life can distribute tasks across multiple forms. This distribution allows each participant to specialize, refining its role within the partnership while relying on the other to fulfill complementary needs. The conditions of the deep ocean reinforce the value of these relationships. Limited resources and environmental constraints make independent survival more demanding. By forming associations, organisms increase their ability to access and utilize what is available, improving their chances of persistence over time. These partnerships are not static. They can vary in strength and duration, forming and dissolving as conditions change. Some remain stable across the lifespan of the organisms involved, while others are more temporary, existing only as long as the benefits persist. The flexibility of these relationships allows them to adapt alongside the environment. Within this network of interactions, cooperation becomes a practical response to limitation. It does not replace competition, but exists alongside it, offering an alternative pathway through which life can endure. Each partnership reflects a balance, shaped by the needs and capacities of the organisms involved. The presence of these associations adds complexity to an environment that might otherwise appear sparse. Beneath the surface, processes unfold through collaboration, with multiple forms of life contributing to shared outcomes. The result is a system where survival is not solely an individual effort, but often a collective one. Through these quiet alliances, the deep ocean supports forms of life that might not persist in isolation. The relationships formed in this environment demonstrate how cooperation can emerge under constraint, creating connections that extend beyond individual existence and contribute to the continuity of life as a whole. From fractures in the seafloor, fluid rises that has never touched the atmosphere, carrying dissolved minerals and reduced compounds gathered deep within the crust. As it meets the surrounding water, gradients form, and along those gradients, life organizes itself with a precision that depends not on light, but on chemistry. At these sites, hydrothermal vents release mixtures rich in hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other energy-bearing molecules. The fluids emerge at elevated temperatures, then cool as they spread, creating narrow zones where conditions shift over short distances. Within these zones, microorganisms establish themselves, positioned where chemical differences are most pronounced. These microbes do not rely on photosynthesis. Instead, they perform chemosynthesis, using chemical reactions to generate the energy needed to fix carbon into organic matter. Enzymatic pathways capture electrons from reduced compounds and transfer them through controlled steps, building energy carriers that power cellular processes. Carbon dioxide becomes incorporated into biomass, forming the base of a local food web. The presence of this primary production supports a range of organisms that gather around the vents. Some host dense populations of bacteria within specialized tissues, maintaining internal environments where chemical exchange can occur efficiently. Others graze on microbial films that coat mineral surfaces, harvesting the products of chemosynthetic activity. Still others feed on those grazers, forming layers of interaction that extend outward from the source. Structures associated with these communities reflect the conditions they inhabit. Tubular bodies, expanded surfaces, and vascular systems appear in forms that maximize contact with chemical gradients. Circulation within these organisms transports compounds between external sources and internal microbial partners, maintaining the reactions that sustain both. The arrangement is dynamic, adjusted continuously to remain within favorable ranges. The environment itself is not uniform. Chemical concentrations vary with distance from the vent, and organisms distribute themselves accordingly. Close to the source, conditions may be too intense for some, while slightly farther away, gradients become suitable for different assemblages. This creates a spatial pattern, with distinct zones supporting different forms of life, each aligned with specific chemical conditions. Energy flows through this system without reference to sunlight. The reactions that power it derive from the Earth's interior, where geological processes supply the raw materials. This pathway operates independently of surface-driven cycles, demonstrating that biological systems can be sustained by alternative sources when the necessary conditions are present. Such ecosystems reveal a broader range of possibilities for life. They show that energy acquisition does not require light, and that biological organization can emerge around chemical gradients alone. The principles guiding these systems remain consistent with those found elsewhere, yet the source of energy differs, expanding the known conditions under which life can persist. As these communities continue to function, they maintain a steady exchange between geology and biology. Chemical outputs from the earth become inputs for living systems, which in turn alter their surroundings through metabolic activity. The boundary between environment and organism becomes less distinct, shaped by ongoing interaction. Through this process, the deep ocean supports ecosystems that operate on a foundation separate from the one more commonly observed. Life is sustained by reactions that transform inorganic compounds into biological energy, forming networks that remain stable as long as the underlying chemistry persists. A familiar outline rarely appears here. When one does, it dissolves on closer view, replaced by proportions and arrangements that resist easy recognition. The sense that something is unusual arises not from the organisms themselves, but from the expectations brought to them. Those expectations are shaped in environments where light, gravity, and constant interaction define how bodies are built. Surface life often follows patterns that repeat across species, symmetry, coloration, and movement that align with conditions experienced over long periods. These patterns become a reference, a quiet standard against which other forms are measured. In the deep, that reference loses its relevance. The forces that guide development differ in both intensity and consistency, leading to outcomes that do not match familiar templates. Structures evolve in response to pressures that are rarely encountered elsewhere, producing forms that appear irregular when compared to those shaped under more common conditions. Proportions shift first. Features that seem exaggerated or reduced reflect specific functions rather than aesthetic balance. A structure may appear too large, too small, or placed in an unexpected position, yet each variation corresponds to a need defined by the environment. What appears disproportionate is often precisely adjusted to perform a role that is not immediately visible. Materials also differ. The composition of tissues, the presence or absence of certain structural elements, and the way bodies respond to external forces all contribute to appearances that seem unfamiliar. Surfaces may lack the textures or rigidity expected, creating forms that look incomplete when judged by surface standards, yet are fully suited to their surroundings. Movement adds another layer to this perception. The way an organism moves, or chooses not to move, influences how its shape is interpreted. Slow, minimal motion can make forms seem indistinct, while the absence of rapid change alters how features are perceived over time. The connection between form and function becomes less apparent when movement follows a different rhythm. These differences arise from the process of evolution acting under alternative conditions. Natural selection does not produce a single set of forms, but a range shaped by the specific challenges and opportunities present in each environment. When those conditions diverge significantly, the resulting organisms diverge as well, reflecting paths that do not intersect with more familiar ones. The sense of something being wrong emerges from this divergence. It is a comparison between what is expected and what is observed, rather than an indication of error. The organisms themselves follow consistent biological principles, developing structures that meet the demands placed upon them. Their forms are coherent within their own context, even if they appear unusual when viewed from another. Understanding this shift requires adjusting the frame through which these organisms are seen. Instead of measuring them against surface-based patterns, they can be considered in relation to the conditions that shaped them. In doing so, their features begin to align with function, and the unfamiliar becomes more coherent. Through this perspective, the variety of forms found in the deep reflects not deviation, but adaptation. Each structure, each proportion, and each material choice emerges from a process that responds directly to its environment. The result is a collection of organisms that may appear unfamiliar at first, yet reveal a consistent logic when viewed within the conditions that define them. Pressure does not pause here. It persists without fluctuation, pressing evenly across every surface, every cell, every moment. Over long spans, this constancy becomes more than a condition. It becomes a shaping force, guiding how life changes from one generation to the next. Natural selection continues in this environment, though the criteria it favors differ from those found elsewhere. Traits that might be insignificant in other regions gain importance here, while others lose their value entirely. A slight variation in cellular stability, a minor adjustment in tissue composition, or a subtle shift in behavior can determine whether an organism persists or fades from the population. Because the environment remains stable in its extremes, these small differences are not temporary advantages. They are reinforced over time, carried forward through generations. A change that allows an organism to function more efficiently under constant pressure does not lose relevance. It becomes a foundation upon which further changes can build. As generations pass, these incremental adjustments accumulate. Each one may be small in isolation, yet together they reshape the organism in ways that become increasingly distinct. The process is gradual, often invisible within a single lifespan, yet evident when viewed across long periods. Forms diverge, not through sudden transformation, but through the steady accumulation of adaptations aligned with the environment. Isolation plays a significant role in this process. Movement between deep regions is limited, and populations often remain separated by distance and depth. Without frequent exchange of genetic material, groups evolve independently, following paths shaped by their specific conditions. Over time, these separate paths lead to the emergence of unique species, each reflecting the particular pressures of its environment. This isolation does not imply complete separation, but rather a reduced interaction that allows differences to persist and grow. Variations that arise within one group are not diluted by constant mixing, enabling distinct characteristics to become established. The result is a diversity of forms that share a common origin, yet differ in ways that reflect their individual histories. The direction of evolution in this setting often appears unusual when compared to more familiar environments. Traits that might seem impractical elsewhere become advantageous here, while features commonly associated with survival lose their importance. The criteria for success are defined by conditions that are rarely encountered outside this depth, leading to outcomes that diverge from expected patterns. Energy efficiency, structural flexibility, and the ability to function under continuous pressure become central to survival. Organisms that align with these requirements persist, while those that do not gradually disappear. The process is consistent, guided by the same underlying principles that govern evolution everywhere, yet producing results that differ due to the unique constraints of the environment. Over extended periods, these influences create a collection of species that are highly specialized, each adapted to a narrow range of conditions. Their forms reflect the cumulative effect of countless small changes, each one shaped by the same constant force. In this way, evolution within the deep ocean follows a path defined by continuity and constraint. It does not deviate from fundamental biological principles, but it applies them under conditions that lead to distinct outcomes. The organisms that emerge are not exceptions, but expressions of the same processes unfolding in a different context, guided by pressures that remain steady and unyielding over time. Between distant points along the seafloor, separation is not marked by visible barriers, yet it persists through distance, depth, and the slow movement of water that rarely carries organisms far from where they began. Populations remain confined to narrow ranges, their presence shaped by conditions that limit travel rather than by physical walls. Movement across these regions is possible in principle, yet in practice it occurs infrequently. Currents at such depths are often weak and inconsistent, providing little assistance in transporting organisms over long distances. Many species lack the ability to move actively across large areas, and even those capable of motion tend to remain within environments that match their specific adaptations. As a result, groups of organisms become separated, existing in relative isolation from one another. This separation reduces the exchange of genetic material, limiting the mixing that would otherwise occur between populations. Over time, each group begins to follow its own path, shaped by the conditions it experiences within its immediate surroundings. Small variations arise within each population, as they do in all forms of life. In isolated settings, these variations are not diluted by frequent interaction with other groups. Instead, they accumulate, reinforced by the local environment and carried forward through successive generations. Differences that might remain subtle in a connected system become more pronounced when populations remain apart. This process leads to the emergence of distinct species, each adapted to the specific conditions of its location. Even regions that appear similar in broad terms can support organisms that differ in structure, behavior, and physiology. These differences reflect the unique combination of factors present in each area, as well as the history of changes that have occurred within each isolated group. The absence of regular mixing allows these distinctions to persist. Without the introduction of external genetic material, traits that develop within a population remain concentrated, contributing to a growing divergence from other groups. Over extended periods, this divergence becomes significant, resulting in forms that are clearly separate despite originating from common ancestors. Isolation also influences how organisms respond to change. With limited external input, adaptation relies on the variation already present within the population. This can lead to specialized solutions that are highly effective within a particular environment, yet may not apply elsewhere. The result is a diversity of forms that reflect local conditions rather than broader patterns. The deep ocean, in this sense, is composed of many separate communities, each connected by shared origins but differentiated by distance and time. The lack of frequent interaction between these communities allows for a wide range of outcomes as each group evolves under its own set of influences. Through this process, isolation becomes a source of diversity. It does not reduce the presence of life, but shapes it into forms that are increasingly distinct. Each population carries its own history, expressed through the traits that define it, contributing to a broader pattern of variation across the deep. In this way, the separation found at the bottom of the world does more than limit movement. It creates the conditions under which uniqueness can develop, allowing life to diversify in ways that reflect both the constraints and the opportunities of its environment. Time settles differently in this part of the world, not as a sequence of sudden shifts, but as a long, unbroken stretch where change moves quietly beneath the surface. The environment remains remarkably consistent across vast spans, allowing life to develop without the interruptions that shape many other ecosystems. Over millions of years, this stability becomes a defining influence. Conditions do not fluctuate rapidly, and the pressures that act upon organisms remain steady. In such a setting, evolution proceeds without urgency, guided by gradual adjustments rather than abrupt responses. Each generation carries forward small variations shaped by the same enduring forces that have persisted for ages. These changes are subtle, often imperceptible within a single lifetime. A slight refinement in structure, a minor shift in internal processes, or a delicate alteration in behavior may offer a small advantage. Because the environment remains consistent, these advantages do not fade. They accumulate, building upon one another across countless generations. The passage of time allows these incremental changes to compound. What begins as a barely noticeable variation can, over extended periods, transform into a defining characteristic. The organisms that emerge from this process reflect not sudden innovation, but the layering of many small adaptations, each one aligned with the conditions that shaped it. In extreme environments, This accumulation often leads to outcomes that appear pronounced. The consistency of selective pressures amplifies certain traits, guiding them further along specific paths. Features that support survival under these conditions become increasingly refined, while those that offer no benefit gradually disappear. The result is a form of specialization that reflects both the environment and the duration over which evolution has occurred. Organisms become closely aligned with their surroundings, their structures and functions shaped by a long history of adaptation. This alignment is not immediate, but the product of sustained interaction between life and its environment. Time also allows for the persistence of forms that might not endure elsewhere. In more variable settings, rapid changes can disrupt populations, favoring adaptability over specialization. Here, the steadiness of conditions supports the continuation of traits that are finely tuned to a narrow range of circumstances. This does not imply a lack of change, but rather a different pace. Evolution continues, guided by the same principles that operate across all ecosystems, yet unfolding in a manner that emphasizes continuity over disruption. The absence of frequent environmental shifts allows for a deeper exploration of specific adaptive pathways. Through this extended process, the characteristics of deep sea organisms come to reflect the combined influence of time and stability. Their forms are shaped not only by the conditions they inhabit, but by the duration over which those conditions have remained constant. Each feature carries the imprint of a long history expressed through structures that have been refined across immense spans. In this way, time acts as both a quiet guide and a persistent force. It allows small changes to accumulate, supports the development of specialized traits, and shapes outcomes that reflect the unique interplay between life and environment. The creatures that emerge are not the result of sudden transformation, but of a long, continuous process that unfolds steadily beneath the surface. Long before any instrument arrives, the journey is already constrained by the environment itself, as if the descent must be negotiated rather than taken. Reaching these depths requires tools that can endure conditions far beyond what ordinary materials can tolerate, and each attempt carries with it the quiet awareness of those limits. The vessels designed for this task are unlike anything used near the surface. Their shapes are compact and deliberate, built to distribute force evenly across every curve. Thick hulls, often formed from carefully engineered metals or composite materials, resist the immense pressure that surrounds them. Inside, a small space remains protected, allowing instruments and, at times, human observers to function within a fragile pocket of stability. Every descent is measured and controlled. The journey downward takes time, not only because of distance, but because of the need to monitor how the vessel responds to increasing pressure. Systems track structural integrity, internal conditions, and the behavior of external components. Even minor irregularities can require adjustments, as the margin for error narrows with depth. In many cases, the exploration is carried out without a human presence. Robotic systems extend the reach of observation, descending where direct travel becomes more complex. These machines are equipped with cameras, sensors, and mechanical arms, allowing them to record, collect, and interact with their surroundings. Their design emphasizes endurance and precision, enabling them to operate for extended periods in conditions that would challenge even the most advanced crewed vessels. Communication with these systems is not immediate. Signals must travel through vast distances of water, and the connection can be slow or interrupted. Commands are often planned in advance, with the understanding that adjustments may not be instantaneous. This creates a rhythm of exploration that is patient and deliberate, shaped by the constraints of distance and medium. The challenges extend beyond pressure alone. Temperature, corrosion, and the absence of natural light all influence how equipment must be constructed and maintained. Materials are selected not only for strength, but for their ability to withstand prolonged exposure to these conditions. Each component is tested and refined, as even small failures can compromise an entire mission. Because of these difficulties, exploration remains limited. Each descent requires significant preparation, resources, and time. The number of missions that can be conducted is relatively small, and each one contributes a piece to a larger, still incomplete understanding. The vastness of the deep ocean means that even with advanced technology, only a fraction has been observed directly. Despite these limitations, each successful journey adds to a growing body of knowledge. Images, measurements, and samples collected during these missions provide insights into environments that remain largely unseen. The process is incremental, built upon repeated efforts that gradually extend the boundary of what is known. In this way, the act of reaching these depths becomes a careful balance between ambition and constraint. Technology allows access, yet the environment defines the terms. Exploration proceeds not through rapid expansion, but through steady, deliberate progress, guided by the capabilities of the tools and the conditions they must endure. The result is a form of discovery that unfolds slowly, shaped by both human ingenuity and the enduring presence of the deep itself. Each return from the depths carries fragments rather than conclusions, pieces of a larger picture that never quite settles into a complete form. What is brought back often reshapes what was previously assumed, adding detail while also widening the space of the unknown. In recent decades, exploration has revealed organisms that had no clear place in earlier classifications. Some display structures and behaviors that had not been anticipated, suggesting that the range of possible life forms is broader than once believed. These discoveries do not replace earlier knowledge, but extend it, showing that even well-established ideas remain open to revision. The presence of new species in such an environment is not unexpected in itself, yet the frequency with which unfamiliar forms continue to appear has altered how scientists view the deep. It suggests that the diversity present is far from fully documented, and that each expedition samples only a small portion of what exists. The trench, in this sense, functions less as a known ecosystem and more as an ongoing source of discovery. What often stands out is the complexity found within these organisms. Rather than simple forms adapted only to survive, many exhibit intricate structures and interactions. Their internal systems, behaviors, and relationships with their surroundings reveal a level of organization that challenges earlier assumptions about what life in such conditions might be like. This complexity extends beyond individual species. Interactions between organisms, subtle patterns of distribution, and the ways in which life occupies different layers of the environment all contribute to a system that is more structured than it first appears. Each observation adds a layer of detail, yet also raises new questions about how these elements connect. The process of discovery is shaped by the limitations of access. Observations are often brief, constrained by the time that equipment can remain at depth and the range it can cover. What is recorded represents moments rather than continuous presence, offering glimpses that must be interpreted with care. Between these moments lies a vast interval of unobserved activity. Because of this, the trench retains a sense of incompleteness in our understanding. Patterns can be identified, and certain processes can be inferred, yet the full scope remains out of reach. Each finding contributes to a growing body of knowledge, but also highlights how much remains unexamined. The persistence of unknowns does not diminish the value of what has been learned. Instead, it frames each discovery within a broader context, where knowledge is continuously expanding rather than approaching a fixed endpoint. The trench becomes a place where understanding is always provisional, shaped by the latest observations and open to further change. In this ongoing process, surprise is not an anomaly, but a consistent feature. New information often alters expectations, revealing connections or characteristics that had not been considered. These moments of adjustment reflect the depth of what remains to be explored, as well as the adaptability of scientific understanding itself. Through repeated exploration, the image of the trench becomes more detailed, yet never fully complete. It exists as a landscape of partial knowledge, where each addition clarifies certain aspects while leaving others unresolved. The sense of it being unknown persists, not because nothing is understood, but because what is understood continues to expand alongside what has yet to be discovered. Far from the surface, the conditions found here resemble environments that exist beyond Earth, places where light does not reach, and where energy must come from sources other than the sun. In these parallels, the deep ocean becomes more than a remote habitat. It becomes a point of reference for understanding where life might exist elsewhere. Certain moons within the outer regions of the solar system are believed to contain vast subsurface oceans hidden beneath thick layers of ice. Within these enclosed environments, sunlight is absent, and yet the presence of liquid water suggests the possibility of processes that could support life. The comparison is not exact, yet the similarities are enough to guide scientific thought. In such settings, energy must be derived from chemical interactions rather than from light. On Earth, organisms in the deep ocean demonstrate that this is not only possible, but can support entire systems of life. Chemical gradients, created by interactions between water and the surrounding environment, provide a source of energy that can be used to sustain biological processes. This realization alters how habitable environments are defined. Rather than requiring sunlight as a primary condition, the focus shifts to the presence of liquid water and available energy sources, regardless of their origin. The deep ocean offers a working example of how life can persist under these criteria, providing a model that can be applied to other worlds. The organisms found here illustrate that life can adapt to conditions that differ greatly from those at the surface. Their existence suggests that biological systems are capable of operating within a wider range of environments than previously assumed. This does not confirm the presence of life elsewhere, but it expands the set of conditions under which it might be possible. As exploration of space continues, these insights guide the search for potential habitats. Instruments are designed to detect chemical signatures, temperature variations, and other indicators that might suggest the presence of life or the conditions necessary to support it. The deep ocean, in this sense, informs not only what to look for, but how to interpret what is found. The connection between these distant environments and the depths of Earth is not direct, yet it provides a framework for thinking about life in a broader context. The processes observed here demonstrate that biological systems can arise and persist in the absence of sunlight, relying instead on alternative sources of energy that are available within their surroundings. This perspective encourages a more expansive view of where life might exist. Environments that were once considered inhospitable become potential candidates provided they meet certain fundamental criteria. The definition of habitability becomes less rigid, shaped by examples that extend beyond familiar conditions. Through this lens, the deep ocean serves as both a subject of study and a guide. It offers evidence that life can take forms suited to environments that differ greatly from those on the surface, and in doing so, it broadens the scope of what is considered possible. In this way, the organisms found in these depths contribute to a larger understanding of life itself. They do not provide answers about other worlds, but they reshape the questions, allowing them to be asked within a wider and more inclusive framework. Maps give the impression of completion, as though every place has been outlined and understood, yet beneath the surface lies an expanse that remains largely uncharted. The deep ocean extends across vast regions of the planet, covering more area than any landscape above, and still much of it has never been directly observed. This sense of distance is not measured only in depth, but in access. The conditions that define these regions limit how often they can be reached and how long observation can continue once arrival is possible. Each descent captures a narrow window, a brief encounter with an environment that continues beyond the range of any single mission. In this way, the deep ocean shares a resemblance with space. Both are environments where direct presence is difficult, where technology must bridge the gap between curiosity and constraint. The comparison is not one of distance alone, but of method, preparation, and the gradual accumulation of knowledge through repeated effort. Despite this similarity, the ocean remains closer in a physical sense, yet distant in terms of understanding. Its proximity does not simplify exploration. The medium itself, dense, pressurized, and resistant to communication, creates challenges that differ from those encountered beyond the atmosphere. Signals move differently, materials respond differently, and the margin for error remains narrow. Because of these factors, large portions of the deep ocean have yet to be explored in detail. The sea floor stretches across immense areas, with variations in terrain, chemistry, and biological presence that are only partially documented. Even within regions that have been visited, observations are often limited to specific locations, leaving surrounding areas unexamined. The mystery that surrounds these depths is not the result of a single unknown, but of many layers that have yet to be fully described. Each expedition reveals features that add clarity, yet also highlights the extent of what remains unseen. The pattern is one of gradual expansion, where knowledge grows outward from isolated points of discovery. This ongoing process shapes how the deep ocean is understood. It is not viewed as a fixed environment that can be fully mapped and defined, but as a dynamic system that continues to reveal new aspects over time. The absence of complete information becomes a defining characteristic, influencing how research is conducted and interpreted. In contrast to more familiar environments, where repeated observation can lead to a comprehensive understanding, the deep ocean resists such completeness. Its scale and conditions ensure that exploration remains selective, guided by available resources and technological capabilities. Each mission contributes to a broader picture, yet that picture remains incomplete. The idea of a frontier emerges from this combination of scale, difficulty, and partial knowledge. It is not a boundary in the traditional sense, but a space where understanding has not yet reached its limits. The deep ocean embodies this concept, offering a vast domain where discovery continues to unfold. Through this perspective, the ocean is not simply a backdrop to life on Earth, but an active field of exploration that parallels other efforts to understand the planet and beyond. Its depths remain open to investigation, shaped by the same curiosity that drives exploration in all its forms. In this quiet and expansive environment, The frontier is defined not by distance alone, but by the enduring presence of the unknown, a presence that invites continued observation and careful study. What appears ordinary depends on where one begins looking. Patterns that seem universal are often local, shaped by familiar surroundings rather than by the full range of environments where life persists. When attention shifts toward places rarely observed, those patterns begin to loosen, revealing alternatives that follow different rules. In more familiar settings, certain traits repeat with enough consistency to feel expected. Bodies align with recognizable proportions, behaviors follow rhythms that match daily cycles, and interactions unfold within systems that are easier to observe. These features create a quiet sense of order, a baseline that defines what is considered typical. Beyond that baseline, variation becomes more pronounced. Life continues to adapt, but the pathways it follows diverge from those commonly seen. Structures may develop without regard for symmetry. Processes may operate at unfamiliar speeds, and relationships between organisms may form under conditions that reshape how interaction is understood. These differences do not represent exceptions, but expressions of adaptation within specific contexts. The idea of something being strange often arises from comparison. When forms are measured against expectations built elsewhere, they appear to depart from what is known. Yet within their own environments, these forms are consistent, shaped by the same principles that guide all living systems. Their appearance reflects the conditions they inhabit rather than any deviation from biological logic. Adaptation in such environments highlights the flexibility of life. Biological systems do not adhere to a single template, but respond to a range of influences, adjusting structure and function to meet the demands placed upon them. This responsiveness allows life to occupy spaces that differ widely in their characteristics, each requiring its own set of solutions. As these solutions accumulate, they expand the understanding of what life can be. Traits that might seem unlikely become established, demonstrating that the boundaries of biological possibility extend further than previously assumed. The diversity that emerges is not random, but shaped by consistent interactions between organisms and their surroundings. This broader perspective encourages a shift in how normality is defined. Instead of a fixed standard, it becomes a spectrum, encompassing a wide range of forms and processes. Each environment contributes its own examples, adding to a collective understanding that is continually refined through observation. The study of such diversity reveals that life is not constrained to familiar patterns. It can operate under conditions that differ significantly from those most often encountered, developing structures and behaviors that align with those conditions. This adaptability underscores a central feature of biology, its capacity to adjust, persist, and diversify across varying contexts. Through this lens, what once seemed unusual becomes part of a larger continuum. Differences are no longer viewed as departures from a norm, but as variations within a broader system. Each form of life, regardless of how unfamiliar it may appear, fits within this system, shaped by the same underlying processes. In recognizing this, the concept of normal life expands. It becomes less about matching a specific pattern and more about understanding the range of possibilities that exist. The diversity observed across different environments reflects the depth of this range, offering a more complete view of how life can take shape. This perspective does not replace earlier understandings, but adds to them, creating a more inclusive framework. Within it, the forms found in less familiar environments are not exceptions, but integral parts of the whole, contributing to a richer and more nuanced understanding of biology. There are places that do not announce their influence, yet shape life in ways that extend far beyond their boundaries. Far below the surface, the Mariana Trench exists as one of those quiet forces, a region where conditions do not simply challenge life, but guide it into forms that would not emerge elsewhere. Across this long descent, each layer has revealed a different expression of adaptation, each one shaped by pressures that remain constant and unyielding. The trench does not impose change through sudden events, but through persistence, allowing small adjustments to accumulate until they define entire organisms. What emerges is not randomness, but direction, a steady movement toward forms that reflect the environment with precision. In this setting, unfamiliarity becomes a natural outcome. Structures, behaviors, and interactions take on appearances that do not align with surface expectations, yet each one remains grounded in the same biological principles found everywhere else. The difference lies in how those principles are applied, shaped by conditions that rarely occur beyond these depths. What appears unusual at first begins to settle into coherence when viewed within its proper context. Features that seem exaggerated or reduced reveal their purpose, and patterns that once felt irregular begin to align with the demands placed upon them. The trench, in this way, becomes a lens through which the adaptability of life is more clearly seen. Beyond its immediate environment, the influence of this place extends into broader understanding. It challenges assumptions about where life can exist, how it can function, and what forms it can take. Each discovery contributes to a gradual expansion of perspective, allowing biology to be understood not as a fixed set of patterns, but as a flexible system capable of responding to a wide range of conditions. Even now, much of this world remains beyond direct observation. The vastness of the deep ensures that what has been seen represents only a fraction of what exists. This incomplete view does not diminish what has been learned, but places it within a larger context, one where knowledge continues to grow alongside the unknown. In this quiet continuity, the trench becomes more than a location. It becomes part of a larger story about the planet, one that unfolds slowly and often out of sight. Its presence reminds us that Earth is not fully revealed, that there are still places where life follows paths that have yet to be fully understood. As this journey draws to a close, there is a moment to consider what has been encountered along the way. Among the many forms described, one may remain more vividly than the others, not because it stands apart, but because it offers a glimpse into how life reshapes itself under different conditions. For those who find value in exploring these quieter corners of science, there is space to continue the journey, following along, sharing reflections, and remaining present for future explorations allows this process of discovery to extend further, one careful step at a time. And so, the descent comes to rest, not with finality, but with a sense of continuation, as the unseen remains, waiting beyond the edge of what is currently known.